Chapter 6. Medor against coronavirus. Mask show in the scenery of the pandemic. The events of 2020 made all businessmen, both large and small, nervous. At first, only echoes of news about the coronavirus reached Russia, but no one really cared about them. Yes, there was some new disease on the other side of the world, so what? You never know what they were: Ebola, swine flu. And then suddenly the whistle dance began. Foci of morbidity broke out in Italy and Germany, an instant, and the whole of Europe was covered by the virus. Then came the first victims in Moscow. And here it is, a pandemic. In this chapter, you will learn how Medor survived the self-isolation regime, the financial crisis and other difficulties that 2020 brought. Soon after the media began to sound the alarm about a new, previously unknown and highly contagious virus, we began to receive customer requests for refunds. Due to the fact that the authorities closed all catering establishments, restaurateur clients asked to transfer back the payment for complex advertising campaigns. And that was just the beginning. Measures were tightened, people were strongly advised not to leave their homes, and, as a result, almost all advertisers stopped their campaigns and asked us to immediately cancel the agreements and return their prepayments. We, in turn, were not going to deal with our customers the way the bank treated us, where all the company's money burned. Remember that creepy story that was mentioned earlier? So, Medor adheres to a clear principle: it is right to return other people's money that has not yet been directed to the implementation of the order. As a result, already at the beginning of the pandemic, namely in March 2020, money from customers stopped receiving money from customers at all, only refunds were made. Moreover, we were the only entrepreneurs I know who returned 100% of the amount to customers immediately after the request, at least the next day. There are no, we will transfer money in 30 days, in 60 days, and the like. Vladimir Sikovsky. Unfortunately, not all of our subcontractors behaved as honestly as we did. For some projects in which our agency acted as a customer, Medor did not receive the money back. That is, in fact, we invested part of our own funds in returns. But it was the only right step to strengthen the reputation. And with those suppliers who did not give our prepayment, we have not cooperated since then, and, probably, not only us. However, not all of these organizations survived the pandemic. It was urgent to figure out how to survive. I offered Vladimir Sikovsky to sell medical masks. I don't understand what kind of fly bit me. After all, at that time we did not know anything about this segment of the market, and indeed we had never been engaged in any business not related to advertising. The reaction of my companion was not difficult to predict. Vladimir Sikovsky. As a person whose role is always to object, I said, our specialization is advertising. And you propose to retrain in the sale of goods, besides pharmacy. And how long will this coronavirus last? Is the game worth the candle? As I remember his words now. He replied, advertising is going to the bottom, and absolutely everyone will need masks now. Let's deal with them. I continued to convince Vladimir that a completely different time had come, when customers temporarily had no time for advertising. And while there was a lull in our business, we had the opportunity to try ourselves in a fundamentally new topic. Okay, let's assume that the fever associated with the coronavirus will only last a week or 3. But during this period, our employees will at least sell the goods in demand, and not sit idle. As a result, Vladimir agreed with my arguments, and we rushed to look for masks. Vladimir Sikovsky. Entrepreneurial instinct prompted Oleg in a new direction. Not for the first time and, I think, not for the last. He is often led to the necessary thoughts by either an inner voice, or an analytical mindset. I caught myself thinking that he had been right many times, and therefore this time, perhaps, too. Masks are masks, let's try. Buying medical masks in the early days of the pandemic proved to be a huge challenge, even a small batch for employees. And this despite the fact that usually we managed always and everywhere. For example, a couple of years before that, we had an embarrassment. On December 31st, a large corporate client calls and says, "You forgot to insert the introductory speech of our CEO into the booklets." 2 months of work, in the furnace. It is necessary to reprint the entire circulation, and very urgently. The very next day, a plane departs with a cargo of these booklets, which will then be delivered to all offices of the customer's sales offices. And, imagine, we met this tiny deadline. Our employee ran with a new circulation almost directly to the plane's ramp. So, failed, did not have time, this is not about us. Nevertheless, we could not find the protective equipment that suddenly became scarce, neither 10 cents apiece, nor 20. There were only fake offers, there is a product on the site, but in reality it is not. Finally, Vladimir, the most zealous of us all, somewhere found masks for 40 cents apiece and bought them in the right quantity. And that's with the pre-pandemic price of 5 cents. While we were looking for a product, we made a website maskiest.ru, launched an advertisement in Yandex Direct. The masks were bought through Avito for cash. For this we had to withdraw funds from all our cards with directors Vladimir Sokovsky and Eduard Zegidanov. Even personal savings were used. Why, I was ready to close and cash out my dollar deposits if necessary. I believed that the mask trade would not only pay off, but also bring us great profits. Vladimir Sokovsky. By hook or by crook, we found masks on Avito. We bought them through a chain of intermediaries. One of them placed an ad on the website and contacted customers. The second knew the third, who had the desired goods. The fourth was their investor, who gave money to buy these masks from manufacturers for resale. In general, it turned out that the market is very non-standard. I'm not afraid of this word, speculative. At first, we could not agree with the sellers for a long time about where exactly the transaction would take place. They wanted everything to take place in Roitov, at night, under some kind of lantern, like in a detective film. Remembering how such meetings usually end in the cinema, I said, "Guys, we don't know you at all." In the end, the deal was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the morning, near the entrance to our business center. The car with the goods was coming from somewhere in Ivanova. First, a jeep and a motorcycle drove up to the business center. The guys came out of there, looked at us, made sure that we had money, and told the others that they could do business with us. Well, just like in the movies. Then the crossover arrived, also without goods. We, looking at all this auto show, stood still for almost an hour. Finally, there was Porter, a small truck with masks, followed by an investor in a Porsche. Eduard and I unloaded several boxes of goods and moved them to our office. That's the whole operation. After unloading, we gathered the employees, and I gave an inspiring speech. "Guys, a new era has arrived, we are starting to sell masks. Everything will be great, we will earn a lot of money and become rich. Because we are great, we have a lot of sales experience and a well-coordinated team. Let's go." People listened to our proposal without much enthusiasm. They could be understood. The company at that time had accumulated a lot of problems due to the pandemic that needed to be urgently solved, and here we are with some strange ideas. Where is the advertising agency, and where are the masks? As I remember the words of Sasha Gladkov now, the bazaar is voluntary, I'd better go and build Tikarila. Vladimir and I decided, okay, let's be pioneers, let's set an example for our colleagues. We transferred all calls from the site maskiest.ru to ourselves. Vladimir was the first to get on the line. Then Eduard got involved, because Vladimir did not have time to write down the phone numbers of people who made orders alone. They called, wrote, called again, endlessly, from morning to evening. We tried to answer everyone, but it didn't always work out. Vladimir Sokovsky. We received not just a large, but a huge number of calls. Oleg then flew away for a couple of days to rest in Sochi, and even there he had to periodically pick up the phone, as a third line of forwarding. He walked along the promenade with a notebook and answered calls. And still, when I hung up after a conversation, I saw 4 missed ones. It was the same for Eduard and Oleg. In a short time, we received 200 calls and collected 30 to 40 orders. They were simply not ready for such a huge number. They had to call friends who have cars and temporarily hire them as couriers. Soon, Customers began to ask the same question in unison. Do you have respirators? We urgently started searching, selecting, and buying a new product. With respirators, everything was about the same as with masks. The niche is 10 times smaller, but with the same speculative scheme. We took everything we had at any price, multiplied it by 2 or 3, and sold it. And people were buying. Gradually, they began to expand the line. Gloves have been added to the assortment. We decided not to bother with establishing a chain with some large company. Edouard went to the hypermarket and loaded the entire pallet of gloves that was there into his car. They looked at him like he was crazy. We sold this pallet in 2 days. Then another and another. Then we found where you can buy gloves by bank transfer. And this new direction of ours grew by leaps and bounds. Soon we began to buy masks in bulk for 30 cents a piece, sold at retail for 80. That is, the margin from the goods was high, but it was eaten up by the expenses of the advertising agency, salaries, office, warehouse, taxes, and so on. In the meantime, sales went on, and, seeing the active movement, the team also slowly began to connect to us. Which is what we wanted. When the president announced a non-working holiday at the expense of the employer, the directors and I gathered all the employees and warned them that we were switching to a 6-day work week. They called on the entire team to go on official unpaid leave, on paper, and in fact to continue working. What will happen tomorrow is unknown, but today you can make money selling masks, and we will do it. If we get a good profit, we will be able to move on. If not, it will certainly not be good for anyone. Once again, I will pay tribute to our wonderful team. The staff supported us. They saw that we knew what we were doing. The rest, as they say, is a matter of technology, that is, common labor. And these people have never been afraid of work. Tatiana Karnasevich, accountant, Medor employee since 2014. Oleg Krutko very quickly reoriented the agency from advertising to the sale of popular goods. I saw an interesting new opportunity in a situation where other organizations were closing in a panic. He retained all employees who were not afraid of the pandemic and continued to work. We even have new people. Oleg gave everyone who wanted the opportunity to earn money. I'm sure not every director can do that. When there are difficulties in my work, I come to him to talk, ask for advice. He will always listen and make a decision or offer an alternative. In general, I am glad that I joined the company Medor then, in 2014. It was a difficult time, a crisis. My child had just entered a university in Ryazan, and I had no job. Since I quit my job in Samara, I was laid off. As a result, I came to the capital, to visit a friend, and decided to stay. She suggested that I look for a job, and I got a job here. So I'm still working. And even when a little panic began around in 2020, we all passed this test quite smoothly. For example, I switched to remote work, and the promises that the management gave us were all fulfilled. That is, for example, the salary has not decreased. What can I say, even new employees have appeared, and this is in the midst of hysteria associated with the coronavirus. In general, the further, the more interesting. As you can see, we began to engage not only in advertising, and this pleases. When a company does not stand still and constantly create something new, it is always good. So, at least you won't be bored. So, instead of non-working days off at the expense of the employer, we switched to a 6-day week. That is, people, everyone who remained, worked from Monday to Friday, and were distributed for the weekend. Someone worked on Sunday, someone on Saturday. At first, they received as much as before the pandemic, and no more, but they did not complain, realizing that it was better than sitting without work and salary at all. Vladimir and Edouard and I worked hard in this format, 14 to 15 hours on weekdays and 10 hours on weekends. I write everyone who stayed because half of the employees still left us. Someone moved out of town and refused to return to the office, someone did not want and could not work in the new mode. Well, they can also be understood. All people are different, especially in extreme conditions, everyone behaves in their own way, due to the characteristics of their body or character. Personally, my adrenaline was so high that I returned home at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, since I had a 7-minute walk from the office to the house. Although sometimes I did this way on a scooter, this is a separate pleasure. And in the morning he was one of the first to come to the office and plow. What is surprising is that working at this pace for several months, I did not feel tired at all. And I wasn't the only one who gave myself entirely to work for the good of the company. As a result, thanks to the accelerated pace, our profits have doubled. If it weren't for the idea of selling protective equipment, there is a high probability that we would have lost not half, but all 80% of the team. The pandemic helped us identify a loyal core, people who survived and withstood all the difficulties. These superhumans, super teams, with whom we still have a lot to accomplish. New employees also came. During the pandemic, we managed to work as a restaurant manager, an Aeroflot steward with knowledge of English and Chinese, a business coach, a kindergarten teacher, fitness trainers, and owners of travel agencies. We just published a story on Instagram with the following content: "We need people, let's take them without experience, salaries from $1,500. Not a bad salary during a pandemic. There were so many calls about the purchase of masks that sometimes it was even necessary to stop advertising so that there was time to process the applications received. The main requirement for applicants is to strictly adhere to the principle, we promised something to the client, we fulfilled it. If a person contacted us and left a request, he at least needs to call back, advise." Irina Makina, sales manager, Medor employee since 2020. I ended up at Medor just in time for the pandemic. I was invited by a friend who had been working here for 12 years. She knew that the tourism business, where I worked, was simply bent at that time. Of course, I agreed. I was brought up to date, given a phone, a computer, and that's it, sales began. The phone, as in the movie, The Wolf of Wall Street, did not stop, calls came in until 2 o'clock in the morning. In Medor, I found a circle of successful people whom I want to look up to and whose level I want to reach. As the saying goes, if you want to be successful, communicate with successful people. In my understanding, a successful person is someone who has a dream, and he goes to it, achieves his goal. He wants, can and does. The agency employs just such people. They are an example for me. I learn from them, absorb new knowledge like a sponge. The management records training videos so that employees get acquainted with the product, provides materials for study. Although we have a small, but sensible library. If you ask the management to supplement it with a certain book that is necessary for all employees, then they will buy it. So there are many opportunities for development here, there would be a desire. Tatiana Krakova, head of sales, Medor employee since 2020. I came to Medor in the direction of selling masks as a temporary option for work. But when quarantine was introduced, there was no trace of doubt. Everyone's business got up, mine, also tourist, where I came from, died altogether, but our work in the agency was in full swing around the clock. The world froze, everyone was in a panic, and we, on the contrary, were on the rise. As I was told by familiar entrepreneurs, many, looking at us, tried to repeat our experience with the sale of protective equipment. But no one succeeded. Everyone left this segment of the business with unsold goods or sold their leftovers to us. What have we done that others have not succeeded in? Discipline, on coronavirus. Internal regulations and rules helped us to successfully cope with the period of the beginning of the pandemic. I was inspired to introduce them by a trip to the Republic of South Africa. There, the rules are stricter than in America, and the locals strictly observe them. For example, we have developed a system for evaluating counterparties. They must have a good reputation on the network, work in the market for at least 3 years, not to have a lot of lawsuits on complaints and customer dissatisfaction, regularly pay taxes, etc. In the same way, we have described the requirements for clients in order to clearly know who we will work with and who will have to refuse. We also formulated the rules for processing orders. You can't take customers away from each other. If you promise to call the client back within 15 minutes, you must do it no later than this time. If the manager does not do this, we remove him from the line and send him on an unpaid day off. And there are other rules too, the list is quite large. For the period of the pandemic, we still had to remove some managers from salaries, leaving them only a percentage of transactions. And these employees were so motivated by the new system that they started earning up to $6,000 a month. That's what real results mean. The agency Medor managed to significantly improve its position. We formed a tender department, which we didn't have before, and finally hired a lawyer. This is an important person in the company. An entrepreneur is created in order to take risks, and lawyers are created to say in response to every undertaking, "This is too dangerous, we can be deceived, a dubious deal, we must first figure it out." Of course, you need to listen to his advice. The main thing is to find a balance between caution and reasonable risk. So, we made very good money on the sale of masks. In addition, the advertising agency has significantly improved its results due to the preservation and multiple growth in the number of clients from those business areas that have become more in demand than ever during the period of self-isolation. Taxis, large department stores and those companies that have navigated the changing environment and organized a delivery service for their goods. Yes, by the way. On the very first day of work on the project with masks, we began to call for food delivery and feed employees at the expense of the company. And so a new tradition arose, to order lunches and dinners for employees if the work is delayed. It became clear, you can't last a whole day on chocolate bars from vending machines alone, people need normal food. This, of course, is not cheap, it costs as much as renting an office per month. But we decided that we would not give up the cost of meals for employees. Edward Zegutinov worked at Medor from 2011 to 2013 and from 2018 to 2020. I would compare this company to Freemasons, in a good sense of the word. Remember the slogan of the Freemasons: liberty, equality, fraternity. In Medor, each employee is free in his choice and decisions. Everyone is equal due to motivation and the same conditions for all sellers. And this is really a brotherhood. Medor has become a friendly family for many specialists. I myself worked in the agency twice, both times for a year and a half. He started as a sales manager in 2011, then became a development manager and left at the end of 2013. The second time he came to the position of development director was in 2018. The first impressions of the company are that it has been and remains very correct, honest with its employees. But, in my opinion, it is not technologically advanced. Perhaps that is why Oleg Krutko and I had differences in our views on how to conduct operational activities. I always try to work out the process to perfection, immerse myself in the details of the business. While Oleg is a visionary, a strategist. But I respect him as a specialist and professional. Once again, I am a procedural person. I try to immerse myself in the details, trifles, work out the process so that it proceeds perfectly. Therefore, at some point, I decided to leave the company. Vladimir Sokovsky. Edward left our company, yes. But then this happened. It's been about 8 months since Oleg called me after Mo's stand to partner with a large agency. At this time, he traveled a lot, often leaving Russia to learn the language, to develop. I wasn't just abandoned, but rather with a higher level of responsibility than I was physically ready for. Such a number of actions and operations and their multipolarity was too much for me. And Edouard, who remained a friend of the company, was just visiting, both in connection with orders to Medor, and just to chat. We found out that he has useful ideas for the agency. He sees our problematic moments and some of my emptiness. Because technology is not about me at all, but just about Edouard. We agreed that we could be useful to each other. Together we could solve those issues that I would not have dealt with alone. We agreed with him on everything and started working together. I was the executive director, and Edouard was the development director. Our tandem lasted another year and a half. Edouard Zegutinov. My responsibilities in that position of development director may seem boring to some. I wrote regulations and instructions, designed them in such a way that it was easier for employees to perceive them. But he did it enthusiastically, with sincere love for what happens in the end. When people stop resisting innovations, accept the need to switch to a digital format, to some standards, consistent actions, in the end it turns out to be very convenient. This saves a lot of the company's resources. By the way, how to overcome the resistance of the team? Through the so-called influencers, opinion leaders who are in every organization. Further, these leaders spread ideas to the masses, and they are less resistant to the innovations that are conveyed to employees at various meetings. Often, 80% of organizations do not have the ability to regulate work processes, educate and train people, doing it correctly, consistently. The most important thing is to accumulate a knowledge base, which is what I did at the agency. Rarely does anyone have this base. In Medor, there is. Vladimir Sikovsky. Edouard is perhaps the most technologically advanced person who has ever worked for our company. He likes to disassemble microprocesses, take the most difficult task that no one wants to do, and simplify it, dividing it into components and bringing it to its logical conclusion, so that later it will be more convenient for people to work with it. Some of the tables and materials that Edouard introduced in our company, we use to this day. Thanks to them, the work of accounting and communication between it and management has been simplified by 10 to 15%. The milestones that we passed with the participation of Edouard as Director of Development helped us to meet modern realities. Edouard Zegutinov. As of 2021, I work at iResidence, a developer of suburban real estate. As the Director of the Advertising and Marketing Department, I am engaged in the synchronization of companies. That is, I am responsible for how our organization should look. For example, at the time of writing this book, we have a goal, to enter the top 7 companies in this area. And if there have been some leaders in the urban real estate market for a long time, then the fence market is very unstable. So we have set a strategic goal, to go there tightly in 2022. What was the matter? Let me explain. The construction market is the most archaic, only tire fitting is worse. Everything there is based on some primitive, outdated principles, there is no subtle digital approach. That is, what I did at Medora and what I continue to do. Of course, classic marketing is still relevant. And there is always a demand for real estate. It's just that what I do allows me to reach more customers. Take, for example, grocery shopping. We used to go to the store, and during the lockdown period, we began to order them online. There are certain players in this market, Yandex, Delivery Club, Samicat. All of them work on the same principle. The client went to the application, chose food from a specific manufacturer, paid, the courier delivered the order. As a matter of fact, this is not one service, but several microservices. There is a logistics module, that is, a person with a backpack who rides back and forth. There is a display case module that shows food, etc. It's almost the same in our field. If you can buy an apartment online from some developers, then the plot is not yet possible. I am working on this task, and I hope that we will implement it in 2022. I have a specific task in front of me, to completely digitize the entire process of acquiring a site. So that a person independently chooses and registers it online, without personal presence. No offices, signatures, seals, nothing is needed. There are several other areas that need to be fully digitized, but this is a story for a separate book. And I still cross paths with Medora on some issues. Although this is usually not related to the main area of my interests. Is there a chance that I will return to Medora for the 3rd time? It depends on what this company comes to. I'm not talking about the agency itself, but about my own path. If I see a task for myself that is interesting to me, and my eyes light up, if I understand that I can be useful, apply my knowledge and skills and develop them, then I immediately take up this business. The place of work does not play a fundamental role. I came to Medor from iResidence, and then I returned there. I'm really interested in doing regulations, programming, data analysis. I'm utterly boring in this matter. Work is my hobby. So, back to our story. Even during the pandemic, the agency continued to live a full life. Everything went well, to the point that for the period of the pandemic, the business center in which the Medor office is located gave a 30% discount on rent. It is noteworthy that we have never used the premises so intensively, from morning to night. Since some of the employees were remote, we equipped a gym in one of the large offices. We bought a barbell, dumbbells, a jump rope, put a large TV. My day usually went like this: breakfast, came to the office, worked. After lunch, I ran around in the park for about an hour, trying not to catch the eye of the police. I went back to the office, worked out in the gym and worked again until nightfall. During the pandemic, I got in great physical shape, perhaps better than ever. It's even a pity that now we have turned the gym into an office again. But we left the food for the employees. This is better than installing snack machines in the office, and is beneficial in all respects. If the employer provides employees with hot food, then they have more strength to work, and the attitude towards the company improves. Also, during the pandemic, we paid for taxis for those employees who did not have their own cars, and they were afraid to ride public transport. And for some employees who lived very far away, we rented a house near the office. Then, however, we realized that this was contrary to our principle: financial conditions should be the same for all employees. Why do we pay rent to someone, and not to others? So when the government allowed us to leave the house, we did the following. Employees of the client department for every $15,000 in margin began to be given an additional bonus of $500. The manager could spend it on renting an apartment or pick it up in cash. The implication was that those employees to whom we rented an apartment had to earn bonuses that went to pay for housing near the office. That is, we try to provide our employees with equally good conditions. We do not have such a salary that a person who has been working for 12 years has a higher salary than someone who has come recently, but shows a more productive result. People get exactly as much as they earned, regardless of origin, seniority, and so on. Galina Kolikova, head of sales, Medor employee since 2011. I have been working at Medor for a long time, at the time of writing this book for 10 years. I came with a great desire to earn a lot of money and establish myself in Moscow. I myself am from Perm. Such is the challenge to myself. I had little experience, but I was overwhelmed with enthusiasm, which I directed to work, the development of a new field for me. I devoted almost all my time during the day to the agency, and in the evenings at home I diligently prepared for the next working day. And I got great pleasure from the powerful feedback. I managed to earn as much as I planned. In short, I like the work I do. I like the image of the head of the sales department. It is interesting for me to develop in this direction. I must say right away that not everyone succeeds in being a sales manager. There are people who, in principle, have a different mindset. They do not like to sell, they are shy or do not know how. Well, surely they will find themselves in something else. Nigora Ashurova, head of department, sales manager, Medor employee since 2012. I will add to Galina's words, in 2012 I decided to change my place of work because of the small salary and came to Medor. At my previous job, I was bothered by the need to rely only on a salary, not being able to jump over it. But when the salary depends only on you, this is a completely different matter. If a person begins to feel sorry for himself or give himself indulgences, then it is unlikely that he will succeed, not only in business, but also in life in general. Therefore, I took on any job, knowing that I could only rely on myself. I raised the child alone. After becoming a sales manager, I never tried to choose customers. Fatter, I worked with everyone. This is true, everyone is treated equally. I found the secret of the success of a long and successful work in the company precisely in taking on any business, taking the initiative. I'll do one thing, the other, and in the aggregate I see, it turns out well. And if you sit and wait for the weather by the sea, then nothing will ever come of it. I know that everything depends only on me. Ideas, desire, zeal come, you have to try everything. Until you try, you will not understand whether it will give a result and what it will be. What if you get everything you wanted, and even more?